Hello everyone, Randy here, and today we're doing another Shop Basics with R.D. Allen. And this time, again, not such a basic topic here. We're going to be talking welding, this time stick welding. And again, for this, I'm going to use using my Forney 190 MP welder. We're going to set it to stick mode. And basically, stick welding involves using electrodes. So, electrodes like this. And we've got all kinds of different choices when it comes to electrodes here. I've got some 6011. I've got some 7014s, and then I got some 7018s as well here. And of course they come in several different sizes. I think all three of these are 5/32. So these are big welding rods. Really blow some holes with that. We'll probably start out with some 1/8 inch 7014 here for starters. A little bit smaller rod, and then maybe we'll try something bigger here like a 6011. And yes, of course, depending on what your weld, again, just look it up. Read the descriptions on the electrodes here. Like I said, 7014, 6011, good starters, 7018 as well. Next, amperages to weld that here. For your welder, again, a lot of times the welders will have settings on them. This one particularly does inside the cover here. I'm actually going to go with what it recommends on the electrode boxes though. So for the 7014 here, actually we'll start with the 7014 1/8 of an inch here. So 7014 1/8 of an inch here. It says to weld at 110 to 140 amps. So we'll just probably start like in the middle, 130 or something like that. That'll be a good spot to start. Stick welding, usually somewhat cheap. These don't cost that much. Okay, so to get started, first off you need to prepare your material. Make sure it's clean. Make sure, if you're joining two pieces together, you want to make sure you bevel those pieces so you get good penetration with the weld. And if you've never done it before, find yourself some nice scrap pieces of steel, which is what I have here. These are just some scraps, and we'll just lay some weld down on them. And once you get yourself confident with a good weld bead, again, we're basically just going to stitch back and forth, zigzag motion, back and forth. Especially if you're joining two pieces together, zigzag back and forth between the two pieces, filling the area in with material. Welder, we'll turn that on here. So stick welding, ground clamp. And this is actually ground in this case. Depending on your electrodes, you'll have to reference this as well. Sometimes you weld with a positive ground clamp, sometimes you weld with a negative ground clamp. In this case, we're going to be welding with a negative ground clamp. So this is negative. For those of you who watched my MIG welding, you'll know this was positive. In this case, it's going to be negative. Next, we need our stick electrode, our holder, stick electrode holder. Usually looks like this. Keep in mind with this, as soon as you touch this to the metal, it's going to start the arc. There's no on-off switch with this. So that, in my opinion, what makes stick welding just a little bit more harder. Not that it's really that hard. You don't have quite as fine control, in my opinion. With a wire weld, you can just let off the trigger, it stops. So, next you're going to need some PPE, personal protective equipment. Welding helmet, very important. Don't want to burn your eyes out. I'm also wearing one of the PPEs as well. A welding jacket. Want to make sure you have long sleeves, non-flammable, or a welding jacket. And then of course welding gloves. Everything here is going to be hot, very hot. Definitely don't want to touch anything you've just welded. So let's get started here. Put the welding gloves on. Actually, let's put our electrode in here first. We'll just put that. Grab electrode here. Can you actually go in both ways? You can weld, not like that. Weld like that if you want. I've never done that before, or you can weld like this. And usually I give it a nice turn in there just to make sure we're making good contact with the electrode. And at this point, you touch the metal, it's going to start the arc. So I want to make sure we get our gloves and helmet on here in a moment. Also, as far as welding helmets go, I really like the auto darkening. It's not required, but makes it, in my opinion, much easier to weld with an auto darkening welding helmet. You can really see what you're doing. As soon as you stop the arc, it lightens back up. You can see where you welded. As soon as you start the arc, it darkens back up. So it really makes it easy to see what and where you're welding. But again, like I said, not necessarily required. Okay, so I think we're ready here. Just another welding jacket over my legs here, by the way, because I don't have long pants on. This should work just fine. So let's get started here. Again, we're using 1/8 of an inch 7014. And make sure we actually set this here. We'll set it to, like I said, about 100, about 120. Yeah, that should be fine. Again, once you get a little more used to this and figure out what you're doing, you kind of tune that to what you think it needs to be. Okay, let's go. And actually, before we go here, I should mention one thing too. To start the arc, we're going to basically just strike it like we do a match. It's probably going to not start right away. Usually it takes a couple tries. Once the electrode's hot, then it should start, and we should be able to start welding. So just kind of like you do a match, we're just going to try to start the arc. Okay, there we go. You folks may notice something there. Let me take the ground clamp off. Notice yonder hole, yes. I forgot this was a thinner material here. 1/8 of an inch is probably a little bit too big for this material, and or like I started doing there, we just needed to weld faster. So like I said, I forgot this was thin material. Something to keep an eye on. This hole was already here, by the way. That wasn't something I blew in there, but something to keep in mind. Watch the size of the welding rod you're using. Again, usually the chart in the book, the manual that came with your welder will be very helpful for that. And a lot of times the data on here, just read your welding packages will help you with that. Okay, so we just need to wait for that to cool. And keep in mind, of course, it's going to be hot. And of course, for this, two tools are useful: a chipping hammer and a brush. So once you get it mostly chipped off, just brush it. And you can see the weld there. I don't got it all chipped off there, but again, we're just practice welding here, so not really that important. Basically looking for a nice, smooth weld. Kind of like what we have going right here. Again, I want to be careful, this is quite hot yet. And of course, ideally, you don't want to be blowing holes in your metal. Again, the rod we're using probably a little bit thick for that and a little bit high of amperage. Okay, so let's see what we can do with stick welding. One advantage of stick welding, we can probably get a little bit better penetration here. We're going to weld on this piece of steel here. Let's see what's here. How do we want to do this? Of course, welding in an upright position like this is the easiest. Trying to weld vertically, a little bit more difficult and challenging. So I always recommend, start out on a nice flat surface. Just get yourself some nice beads going. Get yourself a nice piece of plate steel like this. Just run a couple beads down it. Once you'll probably be able to see where you start. Okay, this is your first line you did. Never welded before. By the time you get to the end, you should be somewhat confident at it. Just get that nice smooth arc going. Of course, a thicker plate too. So if you do blow holes, you're less chance of doing so. Okay, so we're going to step this up here. Let's step it up to some 60-11. 5 30 seconds. These are some big, meaty rods. So we'll put the 70-14 here away. 60-11 here has really good penetration, so we can really blow some holes with this. This stuff's pretty thick, so I don't think we have to worry about it, but you never know. Okay, for the 60-11, we need to weld at 50 to 160 amps. That's quite the wide range there, wow. So 50 to 160. We'll maybe just leave it about 130 or so. Yeah, I'm not sure why quite the wide range there. That seems awfully high of a range. Let's see, what does this one say? This one is 80 to 130. Okay. Again, stick it in there. I usually like to give it a roll or two, make sure it's making good contact. Make sure we put our PPE, personal protective gear on, helmet, gloves, and something to cover my legs with. Okay, here we go. And when you end there as well, I usually give it like a little extra circle or two there, just to build up a little extra material. Otherwise you end up with a crater there. Now this piece has already been welded a few times, so I'm not sure how well this is going to turn out. It's going to be one big weld on here already. Okay, it should be cooled off somewhat sufficiently here. And keep in mind this is going to be quite hot. Too hot, you're not even going to want to touch it with welding gloves, but I'm just going to kind of lightly hold it here. And we'll just try to knock that all off best we can. Give it a little wire brush action there to clean it up. It doesn't look too bad. Again, like I said, it's probably getting a little bit wide of a distance here to try to stitch that back and forth from one side to the other. This has been welded like several times now, just for the fun of it, just to see how the welder works here. Doesn't look too bad though. Okay folks, I think we'll wrap up the video here. Again, hope you folks learned something here. If you've never welded before, it's fairly simple once you get started there. Like I said, just find yourself a nice piece of scrap steel, just start laying down beads of weld. You don't even have to weld anything together, just get practice laying down the beads. And once you get that perfected, then you can start joining stuff together. Of course, like I said before, I kind of find wire welding, MIG welding to be a little bit easier. You can control it just a little bit better in my opinion. Stick welding though is quite easy as well once you get to learn it. And of course, a couple pieces that help. Auto darkening helmet in my opinion, really nice. Make sure you have welding gloves, also very important. Welding jacket, long sleeves, something non-flammable if you need it as well. Welding cap. And then of course electrodes. Good to start with, like I said, maybe 70-14, 70-18, 60-11. Three of those good to start with, like 1/8 of an inch. 3/32, a little bit smaller there. You know, just be careful, like obviously we blew a hole in that one there. 1/8 of an inch was obviously just a little bit too big for that piece. Ground clamp, something you'll have to watch and read too here. Do you need your ground clamp to be positive or negative? Of course, you flip your connections here around. So instead of a negative ground clamp, you'll have a positive ground clamp. If folks have any other questions about this, be sure to leave them below. Also, if you have any other suggestions for working in the shop here, shop basics, be sure to leave them below as well. And as always, thanks for watching and until next time.